afternoon. My name is Marguerite Sullivan. I'm a fellow this fall at the Institute of Politics. And I am here to welcome you on behalf of the Institute of Politics and the John F. Kennedy School to this forum with Governor Christie Whitman of New Jersey. I'm particularly privileged to be up here today because prior to coming to the IOP, I had the honor for nearly 5 years to head Governor Whitman's Washington office and to serve as a member of her cabinet. She was a great inspiration to me and is a great inspiration not only to the citizens of New Jersey and those who work for her, but to people all across the country. That is, however, with one exception: sports. Don't ever take her on. Governor Whitman is probably the only governor to appear not only on the cover of the New York Times Sunday magazine, but also in scores of sporting publications covering everything from off-road biking, kayaking, fishing, basketball, golf, and riding. She's really good. Since I arrived in Cambridge last month, students, faculty, and staff have repeatedly asked me if there was any way I could encourage the governor to come up to Cambridge to the IOP to speak. Now, I know she came here today because she wanted to talk to you, but another reason she decided to join us is out of respect for the man sitting right here on the stage, Al Simpson. Al Simpson, now director of the Institute of Politics, served for 18 years as a member of the U.S. Senate from Wyoming. His hard work and dedication to public service and his good humor are an inspiration to all of us who care so deeply about good government. In my short time here, I have seen how he continues every day to inspire young people and old people like me also. Now I would like to turn this program over to Al so that he may introduce our special guest who has inspired me and also whom I know was inspired by Al Simpson.
Old people like you. John Kenneth Galbraith called me the kid the other day. Just made me giddy. Well, thank you, Marguerite. Thank you for bringing your guest to us today. We really appreciate that, and it is a particular pleasure to introduce the governor, first elected governor in 1994, New Jersey's first woman governor and the first person to defeat an incumbent in the general election in modern state history of New Jersey. I speak from one who represents, or did for many years, the state of Wyoming, where we had the first woman governor in the world and were the first government in the Western world to give women the right to vote in 1869. Just jot it down, there'll be a test later on. And so that's a particular pleasure. And then to see what she's done with her administration. The first African American to sit on the state Supreme Court, the first female state Supreme Court Chief Justice, and the first female Attorney General under her remarkable administration. And she's been an extraordinary executive, strong and fair, signed 17 tax cuts into law, including a 30% income tax cut for most families, auto insurance reform, comprehensive school reform plan that ended a 30-year legal scrap over funding inequalities in the New Jersey schools and established core curriculum standards. These are tough to do in politics. She was responsible for tough crime-fighting initiatives such as Megan's Law, the no early release law, the 3 strikes and you're in instead of out, and have lowered New Jersey's crime rate to its lowest point in 24 years. She is one who walks the walk instead of just talk the talk, and she will share with you some things today, I'm certain, that will be very thought-provoking, filled with her energy and spirit, and she has all of that, and courage. And that's what you have to have in this game. It's a contact sport. And so one other thing, there is a Harvard connection here. The governor's husband, John Whitman, is a graduate of the Harvard Business School. And we are exceedingly honored to have her with us today, Governor Christine Whitman.
Thank you, Senator, very much. I appreciate that introduction. And although I would say that New Jersey, in its first constitution back in the 1600s, allowed women the vote, and then they figured out that that was a mistake and took it out in the next one. So it didn't take them long to decide that they didn't want to continue with that. But I really want to say to everyone that it's great to be here at the Kennedy School. I appreciate this opportunity, although I have to tell you up front, I was a little upset when I saw the posters that indicated what I was going to be talking about this afternoon, and I'm not. I have to tell you the truth right up front. I will be talking about something else and some other things that I find to be of great importance today and very troubling. But I want to start off by saying, Alan, I think that everyone here agrees that we miss you in Washington. It may be great to have you here, but I think the Congress could use a good dose of Simpson sense of humor and wisdom right about now. But of course, as we all saw earlier today, when someone leaves the Senate, the sky's the limit, whether you're John Glenn up in outer space or Alan Simpson here at the rarefied atmosphere of Harvard. So it's great to have you here. You know, over the past 6 or 7 weeks, I've been doing a lot of traveling around the country, speaking to various groups, campaigning. There are some very good candidates. They all happen to be Republican, but that's just a bias. But every place that I have been, from Hawaii to New Hampshire, Florida to New Mexico, I found that a few things hold true everywhere. The elections next Tuesday will be decided on local issues. I know that not everyone agrees with me, and the Republican Congressional Committee now is running ads on the Clinton scandal, and recently I was on Meet the Press, it was just last Sunday, and Tim Russert's first question to all the panelists was, will the election on November 3rd be a referendum on Bill Clinton? I don't believe it will be, and I don't believe it should be. I found that people across this country are sick and tired of hearing the lurid details of the mess in the White House, and I agree with them on that. I'm sure many of you, wish I've never heard of Monica Lewinsky. I wish this administration never had an intern program, and I don't want to rehash any of the details here, and I won't. But despite our disgust at what's gone on, as much as we would like it to just go away, so we never have to think about it again, there are aspects of this situation that simply cannot be ignored, because it's really not all about sex. It really is all about trust. Clearly, the president's response in this matter has not only damaged his credibility, but has damaged the credibility of every public servant around this country. The past 10 months have been a long national nightmare. Instead of attending to the nation's needs, the president's been pursuing a quest first for vindication and most recently for redemption. He even described his most recent efforts at Mideast peace as a part of his quote-unquote personal journey of atonement. And I have to say that I find that notion more than just a little unsettling, whatever the short-term gains from the accord that was reached. We must never forget, as a people, that the presidency is bigger than any president. It requires more than just an efficient bureaucrat in chief. It must never give rise to a cult of personality, and it certainly should never be used by any person as a forum for working out their own personal failures and challenges. Most Americans are still giving this president the benefit of the doubt. We seem willing to overlook behavior which may and are repulse and offend us individually, but we don't believe affects his ability to lead. But in doing so, I believe that we are indulging in a false sense of complacency. The president's behavior is a measure of the president's character, and character does count, especially in a leader. I don't know of any parent who teaches their child that it's okay to lie today if you say you're sorry tomorrow. Yet that's what our nation's #1 role model is asking all of us to accept. Of course, we've been very fortunate so far. Times have been good. The economy is moving forward. America's at peace, and we haven't needed strong leadership to meet any immediate domestic crisis. But I have, and publicly, and I don't hide that, questioned the ability of the president to lead should the need arise. People will not follow someone they don't trust, And that's a dangerous situation for anyone, particularly when you're talking about the world's remaining superpower. But the president hasn't been the only one who has been a casualty of what I call the trust gap. Feminist leaders are also suffering from the same problem. Their reaction, or more accurately, their lack of reaction to the president's behavior has left many wondering just whose side they're on. So I know of only one woman's group, the Wish List, that has actually spoken out against some of the behavior that's gone on. And as a woman who serves in elective office, I understand the debt we owe to those who have worked so long and hard to achieve equal opportunity for women in this great country. Feminist leaders have been fighting for years to make it possible for women to break through barriers and crash through glass ceilings in every aspect of life. I think of how far women have come in politics since my mother's day. When she was active in Republican politics, a newspaper identified her as one of 5 women who might have be poised to be the first woman governor of the state of New Jersey. In New Jersey case, they were only off by 40 years in one generation. But I believe women everywhere would still be treated like second-class citizens if not for the effort in the last 30 or 40 years of people such as Bella Abzug and Gloria Steinem and Betty Friedan. They have truly blazed a path. That's why I am perplexed by the reaction of so many feminist leaders to the situation with Bill Clinton. They've been absolutely silent, silent as never before in their history, certainly. We need to remember that feminism has never been about partisanship. At its heart, it's a matter of personal integrity and belief. From its inception, feminism has challenged people to take responsibility for their actions. And that means holding people accountable even when those actions, or especially when those actions, are untrustworthy or harmful. We as women have rejected the false chivalry of paternalism because it sought to keep us in our place. And our place is wherever we want it to be, wherever we determine it to be for ourselves. We rejected the sexism that treats women as objects because it undermines our self-esteem. So to see these leading feminists soften their position on issues of fundamental importance to all women is to see them put their credibility at risk. Where the American people expect to hear voices raised in justifiable indignation, they hear silence. And that silence is deafening. Most feminist leaders have stood by and watched as women who have charged the president with improper behavior have their pasts investigated, their physical appearances ridiculed, and their lifestyles demeaned. I signed a law in New Jersey. I signed a law outlawing that sort of character assassination in sexual assault cases. It's equally out of place here. Sadly, by remaining silent, those leaders are sending a message that issues like gender discrimination and sexual harassment aren't always absolutely wrong. They are only sometimes sort of mostly kinda not what we want to see. If you vote the right way or appoint enough women to top positions or advocate women-friendly policies, we can overlook your personal behavior. Most people call that hypocrisy. And women cannot afford to have the important message of gender equality watered down by hypocrisy. And who's getting the mixed message? Well, women all over America, especially those who don't hold positions of power or influence, are getting a message that you can't always count on sisterly solidarity if you're being harassed by a powerful man. And men all over America, especially those who do wield power and influence, are also getting a mixed message. If I do good things for women as a group, it doesn't matter how I treat women as individuals. Those messages are completely contrary to what feminists of every political persuasion have been saying for years. Sexual harassment and gender discrimination are always wrong. These behaviors should never be overlooked or swept under the rug. But because the feminist political community has decided to create a new standard for their so-called best friends, they are losing the trust and respect that they've earned over many, many years of hard work. The loss of trust is also America's loss. I haven't always agreed with the leading feminists in our country, but I have always believed that the work they do is important to the future of every American woman. And that's where I've put my money where my mouth is, in active support of the feminist groups. And I have to tell you, I've written my last check, at least until they regain their voices and stand up for what we know they really believe, regardless of who it offends. It's time to remember how to speak the truth to power, no matter how much it hurts. The past 10 months in American politics have been a sordid, difficult mess. It's been difficult for the president, his family, his friends, his supporters. It's been difficult for the press that have had to cover it. And it's been difficult for the members of Congress who have to look at it. But it's also difficult for parents, teachers, and mentors who are trying to teach our children the difference between right and wrong, telling the truth and earning trust, and the need to accept personal responsibility for your actions and the consequences that go with those actions. Having raised 2 children, there's one thing that I know for sure. Children learn by example. And the example that has been placed in front of America's children by the mess in the White House is not a good one. And don't think kids haven't noticed what's going on. And that becomes perhaps the most difficult thing with which we have to deal. 2 weeks ago, I was in Chicago, and I visited a program for unwed teenage mothers. And I was asking a 16-year-old about when we needed to start intervening, when we needed to start reaching out to young people to tell them about sex. And she said, we need to start teaching kids about sex much younger than we do today. She said, my 9-year-old sister is starting to get hit on by the boys. And everywhere we look, sex is all around us, even in the news. And I had a woman who works with me tell me a story recently. Her husband had gone out of town for a few days, and her 9-year-old asked her where her father was, and she said, he's in New York. And this little 9-year-old said, well, how do you know? She said, well, he's on a business trip. He told me he was going to New York. And her daughter looked at her and said, well, how do you know he isn't cheating on you? And she said, where on earth did you get that idea? And she said, well, Hillary didn't know that Bill was cheating. This is from a 9-year-old. What does that say about what we're teaching our children about trust, about the world that they are going to inherit and that they're going to be leading? The impact of this situation is going to be with us for years. And it will be hard to hold our kids responsible if we're not willing to hold our leaders responsible. Some have suggested that by making our leaders tell the truth, take responsibility for their actions, accept the consequences of the choices they make, we're setting the bar too high. We've all heard it. All presidents have affairs. All politicians lie. It's only about sex, so it's okay. I know I've heard that over and over again from people. Well, I for one, don't buy it. I think we do well to remind ourselves again of what Cicero advised: judge all in the conduct of the best examples available. We expect our children always to do their best. Should we expect any less of our leaders? That's why I don't think we're asking too much if we ask a president that he not lie to the American people. And that's why I don't think we're asking too much of the women's movement when we expect its leaders to remain true to the fundamental principles that they have espoused for so many years. Next Tuesday, when the voters go to the polls to elect governors and mayors, members of Congress, and council people, they will cast their ballots for the candidates that they believe best address the interests and concerns of their communities. The way the votes are counted will be neither for nor against the president. We don't have a parliamentary system. This is not a referendum on Bill Clinton. That's why this election will not put to rest the debate over the future of this presidency, and it really shouldn't. This nation's discourse on this has not yet run its course. We've let our revulsion at the details crowd out our need to attend to the real core of the matter, and that is the question of how much we value the role of trust and truth in a free society. I firmly believe that the answer America gives to that question, whether we decide that getting the trains to run on time is the most important thing, or whether we decide that character really does count, is going to determine our future as a nation in a way no single off-year election ever could. Thank you very much.
Questions now from the audience, and I was just thinking of something you see every day when you come here.
Right here.
Veritas. Tough to sort out sometimes, but something to think about continually as we share this podium and forget the symbolism of that one word. Question, and we'll go around from this to this and this and this and just spot all over the place. First, your question, please.
Hello, my name is Beth Schoenmuller, and I'm from Toms River, New Jersey, and I'm a sophomore at the college. As a New Jersey resident, I can attest to your strong record on women's issues, your commitment to putting women in higher ranking offices, and I applaud these efforts. However, despite this strong record, some groups who specifically label themselves as feminist have only been lukewarm in their support of your programs. I'd like to know, in your speech, are you talking about all women and all women's groups, or some women and some women's groups?
No, as I mentioned in the speech, there is at least one group that I know of that has spoken out on this issue, the Wish List, which has condemned the silence and condemned the behavior. But unfortunately, the biggest groups, the best known, the ones that have been really the pioneers on women's issues now, for instance, NARAL, those ones are the ones that have been the most silenced. The ones that have really been fighting for women's equity over all the issues, fighting against bias, fighting against discrimination, fighting against the kinds of things that put down women, those are the ones where we haven't heard a word. And in fact, I heard just the opposite. I was in Chicago last week, and Ellie Schmiel was endorsing Carol Moseley Braun, which is fine, and that's not a surprise, but one of the reasons she said to vote for was to protect the president, to give another vote to protect the president. And that just stunned me. To get out and support Carol Moseley Braun for whatever reasons you want, fine, that's absolutely appropriate, but I was just really startled by the second part of her equation.
Hi, my name is Mark Wise, and I'm also a Jersey boy.
Good.
Born and bred in Fairlawn and taught in Edison, New Jersey for the last 5 years before coming up here to the Kennedy School. My question deals with education and the Abbott-Burke decision.
Yeah.
You had, or it was stated before that you had overseen this transition of the spending that's going to be reallocated because of Abbott v. Burke. My question to you is, now with the increased spending that the state is forced to by the court in New Jersey to spend on these 28 districts, what will happen to the remaining districts? Is there enough of a money pie, especially with your fulfilling of your commitment of a 30% tax cut, to be spread among these different districts?
Sure. Well, the question he's asking our Supreme Court for 28 years, between 28 and 30 years, have been after the state of New Jersey to fulfill its constitutional obligation of providing what's called for a thorough and efficient education for every child in every public school in the state of New Jersey. And during the 70s, 80s, and 90s, they determined that as being more money. And we were spending more money, billions more in dollars. And in fact, under my administration, we have now reached parity in spending. And we spend a third of the state's budget on education. But we weren't seeing better educated students for all the money. My predecessor raised taxes $2.8 billion and put $1 billion into schools in 1 year. And in our biggest school district that got the most money, the test scores actually started to go down a little bit. And so what I did when we came in was say, it's not just about money. It's about standards, and it's about accountability. So we put standards in 7 academic areas, and we determined the funding formula that would be required to deliver that education to children no matter where they went to school. And we have committed to spend that money. The state is committed to spend that money to get every school to that level. And we are now testing children in the 4th, 8th, and 11th grades in all 7 subject areas to determine whether or not the schools are delivering the education to them. And so the funding commitment is that we are going to continue to keep our special needs districts at parity. We have enough money to do that. But the most important thing that is going to make a difference for children in my state, I firmly believe, is having standards for the first time and accountability to those standards, and having those standards high enough to ensure that it's going to give young people an education that they're going to need to get the jobs of the 21st century. I mean, we've gone in the 7 areas, besides including the regular math and science and English, we're requiring world languages in the earliest grades. Arts are part of that, a requirement for arts, visual and performing and written. We are requiring also health and sports. So we've covered the gamut. Our science and math standards are cutting edge, and we are going to continue to support the schools to that, but it is not going to require massive infusions of new dollars across the board. And we are going to be supporting every school to the degree that, on this new formula, to the degree that is necessary for them to provide the quality education that are demanded by these standards.
Okay, thanks.
Yes, up here, please.
Hi, Governor. My name is Michael Monson. I'm also from New Jersey. I'm from Fenwood, New Jersey.
Great.
And I'm a student here at the Kennedy School. My question for you is, you claim to be a fiscal conservative, yet over your term in office, you've drawn $500 million out of the state pension fund. You've drawn $500 million out of the unemployment insurance fund. At the same time, you've cut taxes by 30%, the income tax, but property taxes have risen. And at the same time, our bond rating, which went from an all-time high under your predecessor, Jim Florio, has now sunk to a less than stellar level. My question to you is, you talk about children and you're concerned about them, but it sounds, you want to talk the talk and walk the walk. Well, you're talking the talk, but you're borrowing against the future of New Jersey's children. How do you account for that, and how do you do
Sure.
that at the same time that you're giving tax breaks to the
Sure.
rich?
Well, first of all, just in the interest of this being an academic forum, we want to get our facts right. Our bond rating went down under Jim Florio. The bond rating, the bond houses just upgraded our bonds last month. We have been a AA plus. We were a AAA before Jim Florio raised taxes. We dropped to a AA plus. We have maintained the AA plus. Moody's put our bonds on the credit watch. They've taken us off the credit watch, and they have upgraded us. So we're doing well with the bonds. I didn't take $500 million out of the pension fund. What we've actually done is we have fully funded our unfunded pension liability. And as you may know, the federal government has changed the way states are to reflect their pension liabilities in their budgets. And they now have to start reflecting this in their balance sheet, the unfunded liability that every state has in their pension funds. Ours is now completely taken care of. And in fact, the way we did that has saved both workers paying into funds as well as local governments that have been part of the state pension system, have saved them hundreds of millions of dollars and have saved the state taxpayers over the life of that bond issue, $60 billion is what's going to be saved overall. So we have saved and are putting together a very good future for the children of the state of New Jersey on good, sound fiscal footing. You're right, property taxes have gone up in the state of New Jersey. They've gone up in the state of New Jersey every year that we've ever watched property taxes. And in fact, when my predecessor raised those taxes, $2.8 billion, property taxes went up. The average in those 4 years of over 5%, almost 6%, 5.98%. Over the 5 years that I've been governor, property taxes have risen at a rate of 3.7%. So while they're going up at less of a rate. We have kept our municipal aid stable. We have absorbed many of the costs. We've fully taken over the county court system, things that counties and municipalities used to have to pay for before. We have taken over, but property taxes are still a huge problem. And it's why I appointed a property tax commission that's come back with 60 recommendations on how to help municipalities, school districts, and counties control the cost of local government so we can control property taxes. And this year, Because the state is doing so well and we have such a surplus, I have proposed returning $100 million in property tax relief to the taxpayers, the property taxpayers of the state of New Jersey, because it's their money. It was unanticipated revenues. It's above anything that we had in our budget, and so I want to give that back to the taxpayers of the state of New Jersey.
But
Hi, I'm Julie Cashin. I'm a student at the Kennedy School, and I think a major feminist and societal issue today is the balance of work and family. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about how you balanced raising your children with your career.
Sure. First of all, and I think it's something that it's important for all of us to remember, there are no such things as superwomen, and we all have to make choices, and particularly when you're trying to raise a family and have a career, you feel frustrated. There are times you can't do everything. You can't meet them all. But the thing that I have always found, first of all, I've been very lucky. As I got into politics, I got into it on a part-time basis. So while the kids were little, I was always able to take them to preschool or to playgroup and have the playgroup at our house when it was important, and I was there to pick them up at the end of the day. As they got older, I got into more demanding, time-consuming part of work. But for women who don't have that luxury, who have to work full-time all the time, the most important thing that I found was insisting on time for the family, and insisting in many instances that I wouldn't go to a particular meeting because the kids had an event, they had a sporting event, or they were in a play, or they had a review. And at first, when I was local county elected official, I got some grief from my male counterparts. I was the only female on the board. But after I'd done it once or twice, and the meetings went fine without me, things can go on happily, all of a sudden they started taking time to do things with their kids, because it's really what they wanted to do. They just had this sort of perception that men weren't supposed to feel warm and fuzzy about their kids and take time for them. And we've seen that change dramatically. And I've been also very lucky, and I have a superb partner in my husband who has always been there for me and for the children. But the other thing the thing that's just bottom line and important, all the other things we do in life, all I do, all the political offices that I've held, and all that I do, at the end of the day, they're all going to go away. I'm going to be out of office. I'm term limited, and I've got 3 years left as a governor. It'll all be over. But my family will always be there. So they're the most important things. And while it gets frustrating, you don't do everything that you'd like to do, if you really make an effort to not just quality time, but some serious quantity time. And just one last point that I always made as a public official is I've insisted that we go away as a family for a week in the summer, whether we rented a van and toured the parks out west or whatever, just so we were doing something together for the first time, all of us. And when I ran for election the first time, I took this vacation in August, and I got skewered by the press. They said I wasn't serious about being governor. How could I possibly have left? Never mind, I'd been running for 3 years, and they'd seen me around everywhere. And you just have to shrug it off and say, look, this is more important to me than that. There'll be a campaign when I get back. There's plenty of time after a week in August to present myself to the voters of the state of New Jersey. And ultimately, you just have to remember that it is a constant balancing act. You can do it particularly if you have a good partner and teammate. That makes a world of difference.
Hi, my name is Peggy Lim, and I'm from Tampa, Florida. I'm an undergraduate in college. I appreciate and I admire government leaders who want accountability in our government, but I also want to pose a question to you about how you might respond to people who would argue that the reason why we haven't had much feminist reaction is because they fear that there's not a whole lot that you can tangibly do in terms of change in the government. In Russia, for example, if there's shakiness about the leader, then the rest of the country is not so secure, like in the economy and the citizens' confidence in their country. So I wonder if you might have a reason or like things that tangibly the women's or the feminist organizations could be doing to improve the situation that we have without any detriment to the government.
I think that'd be very difficult. And first of all, one thing that I think that's very important, and I've had some opportunity to travel overseas in the last few months as well, and you get a little sense of this from people who don't understand the democratic process as it exists here in this country. Our government isn't going to fall if the president is censured or whatever happens. I mean, with the kind of balance of power that we have, we're going to be just fine, and the economy is going to continue to go forward, and we're going to be all right. The problem that I have with what you're posing as being a reason for not speaking out is that that abdicates the responsibility to be there in the tough times and the bad times as well as the good times. And that's precisely when you need to be heard. It doesn't mean shouting and calling for the president's side. All I'm asking for at this point is let's have a discussion. Let's have an acknowledgement that the behavior that's been engaged in, particularly when you read things that show that there was a concerted effort to trash Paula Jones in the time between when she brought her case and it was first taken to court. That's what we fought against. That's not right. I don't care who does it. You're not supposed to tear down a woman's, her past sexual history, the way she dresses, what she looks like. And yet that was a concerted effort in this case to protect a lie. On the Jennifer Flowers. I mean, you go back and that's the thing that we need to be discussing. Let's have an honest discussion about what's okay and what isn't in the way we treat women and the way we look at these issues. And it doesn't have to. It's hard, I know, because the example is so in front of us, but if we can possibly, even if they're not comfortable about talking personally about Bill Clinton, let's just talk about the issues. Because when I talk to young women who say to me, sex is everywhere, even on the news, and it's so commonplace that of course 9 and 10-year-olds are going to feel comfortable starting to experiment in it. And you know that a girl, a teenager who gets pregnant outside of wedlock is 60% more likely not to finish high school and is therefore going to earn less than half of what her compatriots would earn if they finish. She is resigning herself to a life of poverty, or struggle anyway, not poverty, but struggle, if she doesn't have the kind of support system that most of the young girls in that situation find themselves with. And we don't want that for people. We don't want that for women. We want them to be able to succeed, so we should at least have an honest discussion of what's right and what's wrong, and those things shouldn't have changed no matter who the players are. It's difficult. It's not pleasant, but this country, the test of democracy is you can stand a good, hearty, vigorous discussion and debate and survive it.
Thanks.
Hi, my name is Shayna England. I'm also a student at the Kennedy School. And first, I'd like to add to your list of organizations that have come out against the president, and that includes Emily's List.
Okay,
arguably
good.
one of the largest
yes.
and most powerful organizations. So
That's
that
good to know.
said,
I'm glad to know that because that sends a very powerful message. Emily's List being a
It does
Democrat.
indeed.
women's
My
organization.
question is, given what you've just said about women's opportunities, and especially young women's opportunities, how are we to choose in an imperfect world where we have to choose between a leader who is perhaps a very good man but absolutely dead wrong on the issues, and a person who is maybe not as good of a person but absolutely right on the issues?
Well, again, I don't think we're necessarily choosing an either or. You can be critical of somebody. Lord knows people are critical enough of me, but I survive in office and I'm still serving the public. It doesn't mean you can't bring up the issues. It doesn't mean you can't be critical. I'm talking about the public debate now. I'm not talking about Congress and impeachment. That's something else. That's a constitutional process that needs to be carried out within the full scope of the constitutional responsibility. And if you want my honest opinion, I don't think they're going to impeach the president. We'll go through a process of discussion. I'm talking about the public discussion now of the issue, this hiding it, this tacit approval for if you're good enough on the issues in general, how you behave individually is okay. And the thing that I really would like to touch on most about the conundrum that you pose, and it is, I mean, people have to make a decision and a balance. What I hear from across the country and what troubles me desperately about this election is that most people aren't going to vote at all. They're not going to be involved because it's too tough a choice to make. That is precisely the time when you need to make that choice. I can't tell you what's most important to you. I know what I think, but you've got to make that decision for yourself. But then you've got to be heard, and you've got to be willing to stand up for that and willing to say why if you're going to support one person or not another. And it's something that, to me, at a time like this, when there's so many people who are so upset that are on all sides and say a pox on all their houses, all politicians lie, cheat, and steal, I want nothing to do with them, then you got to get out there because, first of all, not all politicians lie, cheat, and steal, and secondly, you shouldn't accept it if they do. And if you know a politician, you got to understand you're never going to agree with any person 100% except yourself. John and I will have been married 25 years in April, and we don't agree on everything, but we agree on the important things. And what you've got to decide is what are the most important things to you? What means the most to you? And do you agree or disagree with this person on those issues? And if you agree with them, then you say, okay. It doesn't mean you can't still say, but I don't agree with you on this, and I think this is bad, and speak out about it if you think it's important that the rest of the world know that these particular issues or these positions aren't acceptable. But you can still support somebody that you don't agree with 100%. But what is frustrating here and what I'm getting at is the silence. It's the silence. You can have criticism and you can still stay in office. A lot of us do. I mean, that's what happens. As the senator said, it's a contact sport. It's not easy. But this is something about principle that fueled the women's movement and made such a difference to women, to all of us, to you and to me. I wouldn't be governor today if it weren't for what pioneering women did 20, 30, 40 years ago. They made it possible for me to be governor today. And it's because they stood up and were willing to be heard, even when it wasn't very popular and their position wasn't very popular. They still spoke, and that's what we're missing today, and that's where the real loss comes.
Question up there, I think.
Hello, Governor. My name is Daniel Suleiman. I'm a senior at the college. You made some compelling arguments against the president and women's groups, and I think it's hard to argue with you that the trust gap needs some filling in. And you say that we shouldn't accept what the his actions, but I'm still left wondering what you think should be done about it. Specifically, I'm wondering how you would vote if the president were impeached.
I can't tell you that. I honestly can't tell you that because I don't have access to what they're looking at, and I don't know what they're going to draw up in articles of impeachment, if in fact they move forward with that. I know, in fact, today I just saw that there's been a call on the Republican side for more information from Ken Starr. So they're not confident yet. We're not sure that it's going forward, and without all that information, I don't know. I did, and I have said, and I still believe that I thought the president should resign, because we have been through 9, 10 months of agony that didn't have to happen. And it didn't have to happen. He didn't have to even admit that he'd done anything when he was first asked about Monica. All he had to do was look at us and say, it's none of your business. It's personal. It's between me and my wife. Or, yes, I did, and I'm sorry, but we're going to go on from that. And then Ken Starr had nowhere to go. This didn't have to be an issue. The problem here, and the issue for me, is that instead he chose to go on national television, look us in the eye, and say, I never had sex with that woman. And then, even though that's certainly not impeachable, that's just a trust matter, which is important in the whole democratic process, but then under oath to lie. He lied under oath. We're a country of laws. There's got to be some consequence to that. And that's why I said I thought he should resign. He's not going to resign, and I'm not sure that they are going to impeach him. As I say, I know they're asking for more information, so clearly there's still some gaps and some concerns that even those who might be considered the most rabid are feeling, and that's why I'm comfortable that they are going to be very judicious about this process. I don't believe anyone in the Congress looks forward to having to be part of this history-making series of events.
It's interesting, I have to say, this young man is the editor of the Crimson, and he recommended or suggested the president resign several weeks ago.
On the same side on that one.
Very interesting young man and very thoughtful, very progressive, and I think that's an interesting thing that he did. Yes.
Hi, my name is Michael Rothman. I'm a student here at the Kennedy School. I agree with you, and I hope I'm not harping on this point now, but I agree with you that moral uprightness strikes me as an important thing. And I guess if we feel that it has such a strong importance, would you advocate, should we be putting together a fund to investigate every politician who's out there so that we can be sure that nobody is lying to us and there's no one out there whom we can't trust?
That's what the political electoral process is all about. That's what we go through every year when people are up for election. Would one super fund to do it be the answer? I don't think so. Super funds tend to just line lawyers' pockets, with all due respect to lawyers, at least the super fund we know about. But seriously, I mean, your question obviously indicates that a lot of people do it. And that's the thing that's so frustrating. Okay, there's nobody who denies that unfortunately there hasn't been far too much of it. You know, power corrupts, absolute power corrupts absolutely, and powerful people tend to abuse their position after time, some of them. But they're not all like that. And that's why we ought to be out there, and we ought to be asking those questions when it's campaign time. Are you involved in a campaign? Are you volunteering? Do you go to the debates? Do you ask them questions? Do you write letters to the candidates? Do you call them up? Do you say, ask these kinds of questions, or get the press to ask these kind of questions, the ones that matter to you? I mean, let me tell you something. When they asked Bill Clinton, when he was first running for office, if he had smoked marijuana 20 years before, I didn't give a rat's posterior, frankly. I didn't think it made any difference to his ability to be president today if he had tried marijuana 20 years before. But what bothered me significantly was the answer. Yes, but I didn't inhale. I don't know where he was, but somehow I had real doubts about that. That's the way you start to base your judgment on character and what matters to you. You got to be involved. And I'll tell you, though, what we are doing. I've tried to start a dialogue on personal responsibility in my state. I've been talking to religious leaders and business leaders and teenagers about what it means, about just starting to get into people's psyche the idea that every time you make a decision and take an action, there are consequences, and you bear the responsibility for the consequences of those actions. You have to be ready to take responsibility for those consequences. I'm not making moral judgment on what the issues are or what the consequences are. I just want people to understand that every time you make a decision and take an action, there will be consequences of one sort or another, and you have to be willing to accept responsibility for those consequences. If that's not being taught in the home, that is a message that we can get out without being judgmental on my values versus your values. This is just a straight thing that we understand about taking responsibility for your actions and personal responsibility, which I believe is very important. And of course, the other thing that I urge people to do, and in your case it could be slightly different, but when I'm making a decision, and whether it's on welfare or money for AIDS, needle exchange, a big issue that's been in our state, I do what I call the mom test. And I ask myself whether I can explain my decision to my children. Will they be proud of the decision process anyway? And understanding they may not always agree with me, but can I explain it to them? And anybody can do that, whether they have children or not. Can you look a younger person who looks on you as a role model, because everybody who's had some life experience is a role model to someone with less, and be proud of what you're telling them you're doing and how you made your decisions. And if you're comfortable with that, then the chances are you're going to be all right and you're doing the right thing.
Final question, I regret, but we must conclude. Please, final question.
Hello, Governor. My name is Andrea Lee. I'm a member of the community. I'm also an organizer with the National Nonpartisan White House Project.
Oh, okay.
It seems like people in the room may be coming down on different sides with the current situation, but I was wondering if you could perhaps tell us when you think we might see a woman in the White House.
Well, I certainly hope with you. It's 2004, I guess you have on the ballots.
2008.
I don't know whether we'll make it by 2004, but certainly within the next decade, I expect to see a woman in the White House. I would have to say, in all honesty, in looking at it, I suspect a woman coming to the White House will come first as a vice president. And I say that not because the women, and particularly the 20 or 19 of the 20 that you have on your list, aren't eminently qualified and capable. It's because women historically have had difficulty in raising money, the kind of money necessary to mount a presidential campaign. And that's why I think probably at this point it's more likely that we will see a woman come having been vice president for 4 or 8 years. I don't think that should be the case. I think a woman, and the interesting thing, and for those of you who might not know about the White House Project, the fascinating thing to me is the names that are there are women from all walks of life, not just political women. They are women in business, and I've heard people say, well, how can a woman in business who's never run for office be considered logically for a president? Well, how come nobody's asking that about Steve Forbes? I mean, and I love Steve because I know him well and he's a very bright guy, but the women that you have there are every bit as qualified. A woman astronaut, well, we know John Glenn's in space right now, and that was never questioned just because he'd never run for office before he became a senator. So you've got some wonderful names and a great variety, and I hope it will definitely heighten people's awareness of the caliber of women who are out there and get them very comfortable with the fact that a woman can indeed walk into that Oval Office and make a very good president. Thank you.
you a hand of that. Thank you so much, Governor. And let me just add a note. I did not know what the governor was going to speak on when I introduced her. It was very powerful, very provocative, courageous. But let me just add one note from myself personally. I was there during Robert Bork, Clarence Thomas, Robert Packwood. It was the howling. It was Halloween. It was unbelievable. And today, silence. And none of their alleged offenses matched in any way the grossness of the alleged offenses of the President of the United States. I was there. Unbelievable. Thank you, Governor, for everything, especially for the opportunity to unload that one myself. but wow. Thank you. God bless you.